Welcome to r/pro revenge, where a Karen faces justice. Our next Reddit post is from Crafty Bureaucrat. I used to work at a hospital data center in the network operations group. We physically sat in a room 24/7 next to the servers to make sure things didn't catch on fire, we monitored for alerts, and we did routine things like swap out tape backups, but it was pretty simple work. This was ostensibly a tech job, but there were people who had been there for many years back when you had to change out printer paper and run a command from an IBM mainframe. I was on really specialized hardware and software that was difficult to apply elsewhere, so it had become a dead-end job. And because there were people who weren't really tech-savvy at all, we weren't given much responsibility. You can't tell some people that they can log into a server and tell other people that they can't, so we were reduced to the lowest common denominator. Lowest common denominator, you say? Meet my new supervisor, Karen. She'd been there for over 20 years and got the job solely based on seniority. She was a sociopathic narcissist and one of the most unpleasant people I've ever encountered. Shortly after I was hired, we were bought by another hospital and combined data centers. Karen was demoted to a shift lead and had to work with us in the 24/7 rotation. She was very bad at her job, and our responsibilities diminished to very little. We had no agency to fix any problems of our own because it had to be a problem that Karen could solve. And Karen was both lazy and stupid. After a couple of years, I was promoted. On my first day after they announced the promotion, she said, "You will fail," straight to my face. But she had a powerful tool at her disposal, the hospital bureaucracy. Since the place was unionized, the hospital had a just cause firing policy instead of an at-will policy, even for non-union employees. This is, I think, generally a good thing. But on the edges, it set up ridiculous situations where it was impossible to lose your job unless you were really egregious about it, with repeated violations or you showed up drunk or high. We had someone steal computer equipment and they kept their job. It was nuts. And Karen had been there for nearly 30 years, so she wasn't getting fired without a lot of work. That's okay. She was terrible at her job. One of the most important things about the job was monitoring for an alert which would pop up, and there was a procedure we had to go through in order for some data to go through. If we didn't do this, a nurse wouldn't get their lab results back. So on one case, an alert came in. Karen saw it, then decided to keep browsing the web. Because of this, a patient from the cardiac ICU was going into surgery, and the doctors operating on the patient couldn't get a white blood cell count or something. It was something very dangerous for the patient, and the patient died. This still did not get Karen fired. The reasoning from HR was, well, it didn't directly lead to harm. Karen didn't even feel bad about it. Just a complete, soulless sociopath. I'm real pro-worker in general, but some jobs you just absolutely have to do. I was so mad. She had to go. I kept a paper trail of everything she messed up on. It was not nitpicky. Literal life and death stuff here. Verbal warning, first written warning, second written warning, final written warning, termination. It was a slog, and I'd rather spend my time doing anything else, but that's the way it went. Then, Karen figured out that she could work the system. As she approached termination, she would tell HR that she was being harassed. The person harassing her was different every time, which would trigger a mandatory investigation. The investigation took about 6 months, they wouldn't find anything, and we would carry on. Except the warnings had a 6-month expiration, so she could always reset the clock when it got close. Everyone was helpless. Even the chief information officer couldn't do anything about it because of the bureaucracy. Karen was a menace, and the entire IT department had to interact with the data center staff, and that meant interacting with her, and she was universally disliked. She had 20 years until retirement, and she could outlast the heat death of the universe. Then, I had an idea. What if, under the guise of developing skills relevant to the 21st century, required everyone working under the Network Operations Center to pass a Net Plus exam? It's not a difficult exam, but it's not trivially easy. I felt pretty sure that everyone on the team was able to pass, except Karen. We would give everyone better titles, a significant pay raise, and entrust to do more with the equipment, which is something everyone desperately wanted. Then people could actually leave the hospital with transferable skills and do something else if they wanted, and not feel trapped. I spent 3 years in meetings with HR, with my director, with the chief information officer, with HR again. We were in job description meetings that took 6 hours to tweak small wording. Hundreds of hours in meetings. Red tape hell. Absolute hell. Do you have any idea what it takes to approve a significant raise in a bureaucratic muck factory like that? But the raises were crucial because it would absolutely not be fair to ask this of them. Pass a test or lose your job without a large carrot attached would lead to mutiny. And then it got approved. It went over well. I was nervous, but the plan made sense and I was able to communicate that. People would be more marketable, the job would be more interesting, and most importantly, they'd be making 20% more than they were before. And I think it really helped that I also forced myself to pass the test, which I absolutely could have chosen not to. Everyone passed on the first attempt, except Karen. Karen did not pass her second or her third attempt, which was a bonus attempt. Karen, being a classic narcissist, thought this was somehow all about her. That this was a vast conspiracy engineered over multiple years and hundreds of hours just to get rid of her. And she would tell everyone within earshot that's what was going on. Yeah, okay, Karen, you realize how insane that sounds, right? Not everything is about you, sheesh. Well, okay, in this case it is about you, but still, only I and 2 other people knew that. I remember the exact time and date that we told her. She was in such deep denial that it could ever happen. She thought she was bulletproof. I don't think I will ever achieve anything more satisfying in my career. I'm not usually one to take satisfaction in seeing someone's livelihood go, but she was uniquely awful. She was a danger to the patients, and it had been nearly a decade of working with her by this point, and I was just so sick and tired of her BS. I was a hero the day after she was fired. I went to the main office for a meeting, and people were congratulating me like I just had a kid or won a marathon or something. Even the chief information officer. They were just happy for me that I didn't have to supervise Karen anymore. But in my headcanon, they were congratulating me for pulling off this elaborate plan. Morale back at the data center was also high. We learned interesting things. A couple of my coworkers left for better gigs elsewhere. The ones who were content staying were able to stay. And we all had more money and job security. And because anything could have set off a BS Karen harassment complaint, people were stressed out working with her. Her being gone was like a breath of fresh air. Newcomers were told stories of Karen, and they seemed exaggerated, but they were not. So, in order to solve a very important and extremely difficult problem, I pulled off a vast workplace conspiracy that improved the lives of the people I worked with in addition to keeping our patients safe. Getting Karen fired is my greatest and most difficult accomplishment, and I can't put it on my resume anywhere. The paranoid narcissist thinking this is a vast conspiracy but actually being right, it reminds me of that phrase, a broken watch is still right twice a day. Our next Reddit post is from Reaper. I was working for a local county government in the permitting department that handled drainage and floodplain enforcement. I received a complaint from a homeowner who was a nice guy, who lived next door to a house that belonged to not a nice guy. The nice guy lived in an unincorporated portion of the county, hence his call to me as an agent of the county. I drove out to the site to investigate and discovered some interesting facts. The permit agent for the village allowed the not nice guy to fill his lot, which affected the drainage, which caused the nice guy's lot to flood anytime there was anything more than like light rain. The nice guy indicated that there was some tension between him and the not nice guy. And part of the issue is that nice guy and his partner were a gay couple. This ran up a red flag for me, but I was trying to be impartial. So I took the information and some photos for the file and indicated that I would contact the village to find a resolution. I wrote a letter and then called the village inspector, who was a jackwagon, to discuss the issue. Jackwagon told me that the village could do as it pleased, and that I could do nothing to stop the bad guy from doing as he pleased because it was approved by the village. Jackwagon then made a comment about those types of people, the gay couple, making complaints just to cause trouble. At this point, the game certainly was now on, because if there's one thing that grinds my gears, it's bullying. I went back out and spoke to the nice guy to let them know what I was up to, and also that I wasn't going to let this slide. I then started investigating the elevations. The bad guy came out and started getting belligerent about my presence and ongoing investigation. He incorrectly stated that I didn't have jurisdiction over his lot, and that he'd be calling the police. I patiently listened and then pulled out my two-way radio and requested that home base dispatch both a village and a county police unit to the location. I then indicated that since there was a regulatory floodplain on his lot, I did, in fact, have jurisdiction, and I'd be exercising my right to determine the impact of his fill activities upon that floodplain. Both of the police units showed up, and I let them know what was going on. They were both appropriately agitated to have to waste their time, and they let the bad guy know that I was within my authority to investigate. A little while later, while I was measuring things, Jackwagon showed up. He started berating me about harassing the village resident and threatening calling my boss and filing a complaint and so forth. I invited him to do so and asked him to quote which parts of the code I was violating. I was using marking paint to show the limits of the floodplain for the photos for the file, and what do you know, Jackwagon's shoe got painted on when he tried to stop me. Obviously, he was even angrier, as was the homeowner due to the very bright orange paint in the grass in his yard. I pointed out that I did the same on neighboring lots, but they just kept complaining. Interestingly, I found two really wrong things on bad guy's lots. First, there was fill placed in the floodplain, and two, a garden shed was built on the fill and partially within the floodplain. Both are a big no-no and actually against federal law. So, of course, I could force bad guy to fix both issues. Predictably, bad guy and Jackwagon got super angry when I sent the letter out that there were violations that had to be corrected, or apply for a revision. This then led to a meeting at the county office with the bad guy, Jackwagon, my supervisor, and myself. Things quickly escalated to 11, and Jackwagon yelled about abuse of power, etc. The department head came into the conference room and told them both that they were wrong, and they should leave peacefully and comply, or face the consequences, as in fines. The best part was that bad guy had to apply for a permit, and guess who was the one to review and approve it? That's right, yours truly. Now, I was following the letter of the law, but you have to know that poor government workers are underpaid and overworked. Strangely, the permit for the nice guy was almost immediately approved, while the bad guy had to have a very thorough review to ensure that it was correct. You could make a case that I was abusing my power, but I can assure you that the timing for their review was well within acceptable limits. Also, how could it be my fault that they misfiled 3 times before they finally got it right? Generally, if you behave like a civil human and come to the office, we would help you get things done properly so the permit would go through the first time. But bad guy decided that he could do it all on his own, so it took him 3 tries. Ultimately, the situation was resolved, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. Moral of the story, don't be an entitled, homophobic butthole. That was r/pro revenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.